No one in the Pac-12 North had more conference wins than the Stanford Cardinal. And boy, I really remember them being awesome when I think back anecdotally to the best teams in the conference. It sort of befuddled me to go back and look at it. Now, as we spin things forward, we've got a quarterback competition as to replace Davis Mills, Jack West, Tanner McKee appear to be the headliners there. But the thing that stands out to me is a defense that has lost its identity just a little bit over the last couple of seasons. Now, I think about the Stanford defense that not only like way long ago, as we continue to get years and years away from that peak under David Shaw, like not just the party in the backfield, but being able to get good pressure from your defensive front and pairing that with really solid play on the back end of the defense. We had NFL players coming out of the Stanford secondary for a couple of years there. And if you look over the last two seasons, I got to credit Paul Meyerberg, USA Today, for pointing this out. 39 passing touchdowns allowed to just 10 interceptions. Not a good ratio right there. And over the last two seasons combined, 7.3 yards per attempt allowed. So they're not getting pressure. They're not doing a good job of forcing turnovers either on the back end. So can this defense be able to settle in and find an identity? Again, the quarterback competition is going to be something that I think is obviously important to the success of this team. But as we look at Stanford moving forward, what are some of the things that y'all are looking for from the farm?
I think we could see defensive improvement because I think that, we talk about the sample size of last year and the way that the Pac-12 schedule was. This is a team that played 6 games. They allowed 35 points in their opener to Oregon, which was one of the, it technically won the North and then won the conference. And then it allowed 35 games in its second game against Colorado. And you got to remember, these are teams coming into the season with no real prep time, no real practice. But then they kind of slid in, got they went on a nice little win streak to finish the season where they allowed only 23 to Cal, 26 to Washington, 24 to Oregon State, which in this day and age, that's about the best you can hope for defensively. And then finally, in the last game, they got into that 48-47 shootout with UCLA. And I think that those 3 games, the first 2 in that shootout at the end, really kind of heavily skew their overall defensive numbers. Because if you look at some other stuff, if one thing that gives me reason to be optimistic about them going forward is in the red zone, they were very good. They only allowed you to score on 65.5% of your red zone trips, which was below the league average or better than the league or national average. I don't think it was an awful defense. I don't think it was a great defense, but I just think that there were areas of it that skewed things. And I think going into 2021, it'll probably, balance out a little bit where we won't see the kind of, crazy outliers there. But I think offensively, I think that's where the real question is, because they do have a quarterback battle. They do lose a ton on the offensive side as far as production. There's a lot of unanswered questions there. So just for me, if I'm going in, I think there's a lot of stuff we need to see with this Stanford team, because like Barton had been on it for the last few years on this show about how they were trending in the wrong direction. And he's right. They have been trending in the wrong direction. The recruiting hasn't been to the level it once was. The physicality hasn't been to the level it once was. So those are all very legitimate concerns. But I'm not as concerned about the defense as I am the offense, because I do think that they've kind of lost their identity a bit on that side of the ball. And they're really struggling, whether it was a conscious decision to adapt to something new or it's just something else that happened. I think that they're struggling to figure out what they are and who they could be.
Rushing yards a game. They were last in Pac-12 in pass efficiency defense. But that's the 1-year trend. If you go back and look at the 2-year trend as far as the pass defense, they've given up 39 touchdowns against only 10 interceptions, and teams are averaging 7.3 yards per attempt against them. It's pretty remarkable. They were able to win 4 games last year with that. I think replacing Davis Mills is going to be he's going to be a surprise at the draft. And I think he is an incredibly talented player. And I think there's a lot of question marks about this team. And when I love the job that David Shaw has done. But when you talk about trending in the right direction, this year was weird. It was a one-off. They were 4-2, which is awesome. But I think you might see a regression back towards the struggling Stanford team this year with some of those question marks at offense. They're even doing, I just saw this in some of the research that I was doing. Did you guys see that they don't allow early enrollees at Stanford? And for the first time, they've got a couple guys that have actually qualified to do it. So, you talk about youth coming in. It's an uphill battle. So my expectations are pretty diminished for Stanford this season.
I will note, I've done a lot of research on this over the past couple of years. The guy who was the most vocal about about the early signing period, right, was David Shaw. He did not want the early signing period, and the reason is because Stanford does not greenlight kids for acceptance until pretty late in the cycle. And oftentimes, back in 2015, 2014, whatever, we would see Stanford officially give the kid the green light in, October or November. Now, when signing day was February, that was fine. That's enough time. When signing day is, the third week in December, that's a little bit different. David Shaw was really vocal about this, and it has hurt their recruiting quite a bit. They don't get the same quality of player that they used to. I think that combined with their player development as far as their hit rate was just off the charts for a while, and probably a little bit unsustainably so. I mean, I think you can be great at player development and then also get a little bit lucky as far as like hitting on every single stud you sign, right? Which for a while it seemed like they did. And I think they've had a little bit of a little regression to the mean going on there. But this was still a decent team by year's end, as Tom noted. I mean, they kind of had that. What teams were we looking at here? Navy. I know in that first game there were a couple other teams. Just Maryland, like we talked about in the Big Ten preview,
they just weren't ready. Period.
Yeah, like the first two games. I mean, they come out 2% win expectancy against Oregon, 8% against Colorado, which means like they were incredibly lucky to be in a 3-point loss there. It should have been really a blowout. And then after that, they won 2 games where they probably got lucky to win, but the final 2 they played relatively well, I guess. My concern here on offense continues to be the lack of explosive plays. 85th in passing explosiveness, 120th in rushing explosiveness. We talk about this a lot, but man, you got to hit big plays in today's modern college football if you want to keep pace. Stanford could be just as good of an offense as it was 3-4 years ago, and it wouldn't matter because the rest of college football is getting more explosive. And like we talked about with A&M, Stanford is not keeping pace as far as getting more explosive, creating those big plays. It's just, if you stay the same and everybody else gets better, you're actually falling behind the field. I think you guys covered the defense, man. Like they lose a lot of important pieces on defense. We'll see how this goes.
Yeah, and an interesting thing to follow too, because like there was a lack of explosive plays on offense, and I think that's more philosophical because people I've talked to, like as we're heading into the NFL draft process, a lot of teams seem to be pretty high on Davis Mills, and there's a lot of it's like compared to what I've heard some NFL people tell me their thoughts on Mills, and compared to what like Mills was doing at Stanford, it's like he wasn't bad. Don't get me wrong, he had a good season, but he's 7.7 yards per attempt, wasn't really taking the kind of deep balls. I wonder if we might have another kind of Justin Herbert kind of situation on our hands here.
Oh, where we fade Justin Herbert's offensive coordinator.
Yeah,
it's a great principle. You know what Stanford's really missing? Sega Whiteside. All right.